Many families who want a good education for their children have to overcome barriers. For many immigrant families, the barriers can have serious consequences. But an event is taking place this week to help immigrant parents get more engaged in their children's education, which also means being an advocate and a leader. The event is sponsored by the Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center. It will include research presented by one of our guests, an assistant professor of education at Wellesley College, Sue Hung. Also with us is the center's executive director, Elaine. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Elaine, your organization, the Community Center, has been working on this issue for a while. Why have this event this week for parents?
Well, actually, Sue's research has been really interesting for us, and it also serves to reinforce and validate the work and the thinking that we have behind our work. And I think at this time, within Boston Public Schools in particular, there's been a push over the last few years to have parents more actively engaged and to incorporate parent voice and feedback into different issues that happen within the school, in particular with the teachers' union contract negotiations that are still in process at this point. Having this forum at this time, I think is really important to just help put focus back on the work and to bring to everybody's attention throughout the city that parent engagement is something, especially parent engagements for communities with limited access, English language minority communities or communities of color, to have the focus put back on incorporating their voice as we move forward with the redistricting issues throughout the city, which will eventually impact schools when we get down to the city level, and the teachers' union contract negotiations, and then just how schools are set up, with busing and how we look at neighborhood schools, or whether or not we look at neighborhood schools, and incorporating the parent voice into that process. All those processes is critical.
Yeah. So, Hung, right now, almost everybody believes parent engagement is wonderful, even if it means parents in the schools and having their voices here. But there was a time when that wasn't necessarily the case.
That's true, and I think that is sometimes the case even today. So I think that partly what I've seen in Chicago is that community organizations like BCNC and the one that I studied in Chicago, which is the Logan Square Neighborhood Association, play a very valuable role in helping to kind of distance the gap between families and schools. So before I became a researcher, I was actually a school teacher. So I taught, and one of the things that was really challenging for me was to really understand how to get better connected to parents and families in the school. And I think when I think back on that experience, I think it would have been great to be able to work and partner as a school teacher with organizations like BCNC and LS&A in Chicago, because often, frankly, a lot of times schools aren't really very well equipped to reach out to families, so they may not have staff who speak the language, they may be unfamiliar with the family narratives and cultural experiences, and they may just not have anyone on staff who has the time or who's officially charged with that responsibility. So I think that organizations like these can be invaluable partners, and I think that what I'm finding is that teachers and principals and school district leaders are finding new ways to really work with these groups.
I imagine one problem before was that educators would have had, to put it politely, low expectations for the contribution of immigrant parents. But tell me about some of these contributions that these parents are making that you saw in Chicago, and whether you think they really made a difference.
So in Chicago, the low expectations or the distrust was really there. So if you look at the work that LS&A did in Chicago, when they first tried to work with parents and to bring them into schools and integrate them into the classrooms and the school buildings, it was very difficult. So in some regards, it was challenging to find a single teacher who would be willing to have a parent volunteer or work in her or his classroom. And now, many years later, we have the opposite scenario where we have not enough parent mentors or parents to be in classrooms, and too many teachers want and desire parents to be working in that capacity. So in Chicago, they realized that you really have to work on the individual relationship between families and between schools, so teachers and parents working together. So they developed a program called the Parent Mentor Program that has teachers working side by side with parents. So parents aren't working in their own child's classroom, but they're spending a couple hours in a different classroom, building a pretty consistent relationship with that individual teacher, getting to know young people in the classroom, supporting student learning in this way, being there at pickup and drop off, so they're meeting other parents. And so in Chicago, you see that's the fundamental core to how they become engaged at the school. But then it turns into broader efforts. For example, they brought community learning centers into schools, so after school programs are often coordinated or run by former parent mentors, and they poll family members and residents in the community to see what kinds of programs they would like to have in those community centers. And so they've developed a series of different ways. So parents are working with teachers, they're in classrooms, they're planning assemblies, they're sitting on bilingual education committees, they're on the local school council. So they're not just assisting the school, but they're actually playing a primary part in decision making and leadership too.
Elaine, not only can people go to this event this week, but your organization is one that actually helps parents find a way to be advocates and leaders?
Yes. We have parent training courses and parent workshops. We actually partner with Boston Public Schools and their parent university, which is an annual event where Boston Public School parents are invited to participate in a series of workshops and trainings throughout the school year to support their children's education. And our workshops are part of Parent University, but we also run them in the community for all parents who are interested all year round. We also help support parents with translation services and advocacy services and help them navigate the often Byzantine process that is our public education system. So the services that we offer at BCNC are wraparound, meaning that, you know, in conjunction with providing supports and services for our parents, we also provide supports and services for their children. So we have academic programs, youth development programs, and really look at it in a holistic fashion, as well as intervention and counseling. And we work directly with individual schools as well as the district.
So Hung, in your research, have you seen some new numbers, some stronger numbers that this is really working for the students?
Oh yeah, so in the Chicago schools that LSNA works with, I mean, you see improved academic performance across the partner schools. And, you know, the difficulty is that these schools are making collective efforts. They're working on a lot of different fronts. But, you know, in the conversations I have with school district leaders and principals and even the, you know, community organization staff, they all concur that when parents are so visibly and meaningfully engaged. I mean, you go to these schools and I've told people that you really see parents everywhere. You see them in the hallways, in the classrooms, before and after school. By spending this time in the classroom, they know how to support their kids at home, and they're also, you know, part of decision-making groups at the school and pushing back when school leaders, when they feel that school leaders don't have it exactly right. So, you know, these schools have seen a profound change in the kind of relationship they have with parents and families, and they're used to working together, but the effects really bleed into, you know, community life, family life, and in the classroom. So it really seems to have some positive effects.
Interesting, that school you described where you have engagement, the teachers, I guess, are less like an occupational army. And talk about the way those kids see their parents, because seeing them in the school, these are kids who might otherwise look down on their parents as being less Americanized, but this, I guess, would change the game, maybe. Mm-hmm.
It does change the game. I think that students oftentimes reflect, or sometimes they can't resist but take on the attitudes that schools might have towards their families. So if their teachers or principals or school staff seem to feel as if there's very little value that their families contribute to their learning, and that education is primarily something that teachers and principals and school staff take care of, then I think it's inevitable that young children especially sometimes take on those attitudes. But when you actually see parents in your school building as role models and as leaders, and as, you know, a lot of the students actually call the other parents' teachers. And so I think that has a transformative effect on young people too, to be able to say it is very normal and acceptable and positive for, you know, the adults in my community, be they my parents, my uncle, my aunt, or my neighbor, to be inside the school. I think that that has a real effect on children, you know, especially in the elementary school where we see a lot more parent involvement. It's a positive, it has a positive effect on their overall experience.
Briefly, we should, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I just
you
wanted
have
to
something
add
interesting, yes.
that it also has a transformative effect on the parents themselves also, and, you know, the parents' self-perception and their ability to be an active and integrated part of their children's education experience. I think, you know, also builds up a parent's perspective around, you know, other parents, and also their own self-perspective, and they, you know, gain a lot more pride and self-esteem in being able to navigate and be an example.
Instead of feeling insecure, exactly. Briefly, about the meeting, the event rather, on Thursday,
Yes.
the time and place this will be at?
It's at the Josiah Quincy Elementary School in Boston, which is at 885 Washington Street, and the forum starts at 4:30.
All right, thank you both for being with us, Elaine Eng and Sue Hong.
Thank you.
We'll have more news in just a moment.